Have you ever noticed that the kindest people often end up the most alone? The people who understand everyone somehow have nobody who truly understands them. And what if I told you that an empath having few friends is not a weakness, but a psychological consequence of seeing too much? Because the empath who walks alone is usually carrying invisible scars, hidden intelligence, and emotional patterns most people never notice. By the end of this, you may finally understand why some of the deepest souls rarely belong to crowds. If this message resonates with you, take a moment to subscribe and share this with someone who has always felt emotionally different from the crowd. Sometimes, understanding yourself changes everything. Empaths with few or no friends are often emotionally overloaded by shallow social interactions, and this is something most people completely misunderstand. From the outside, it may appear that these individuals are antisocial, distant, or emotionally detached. But internally, something much deeper is happening. The empath experiences human interaction on a level that goes far beyond words. They do not simply hear conversations. They absorb emotional tone, hidden tension, suppressed frustration, insecurity, and emotional inconsistency. What feels ordinary to others can feel psychologically exhausting to them. This is why shallow interactions slowly drain an empath's energy. Small talk, forced politeness, superficial compliments, and emotionally empty conversations create inner fatigue because the empath instinctively searches for authenticity. They naturally crave sincerity, emotional depth, and meaningful connection. When interactions remain trapped on the surface, the empath feels emotionally disconnected even while surrounded by people. This creates a strange loneliness that exists in crowds. Over time, repeated exposure to shallow social environments begins to create emotional burnout. The empath notices that many people communicate not to connect but to impress, compete, seek validation, or hide insecurity. Because empaths are highly sensitive to emotional contradictions, they become mentally overwhelmed by environments where people constantly wear social masks. They begin to feel like they are participating in performances instead of genuine human connection. As a result, many empaths unconsciously withdraw from large social circles, not because they hate people, but because their nervous system becomes overloaded by emotional noise. Solitude starts feeling safer than constant emotional stimulation. Silence becomes more peaceful than meaningless conversation. In isolation, the empath finally experiences relief from the pressure of filtering everyone else's emotions. Another reason this exhaustion happens is because empaths often become emotional caretakers in conversations. Even when nobody asks them to, they instinctively analyze moods, comfort pain, regulate tension, and emotionally accommodate others. This invisible psychological labor consumes enormous mental energy. Meanwhile, very few people notice the empath's own emotional exhaustion. Eventually, the empath reaches a painful realization. Being surrounded by many people does not guarantee emotional connection. And once they understand this deeply, they stop chasing social quantity and begin protecting the little emotional energy they have left. Empaths with few or no friends usually prefer depth over quantity, and this preference changes the entire way they experience relationships. Most people are comfortable maintaining large social circles built on casual conversation, entertainment, shared routines, or temporary convenience. But the empath seeks something far more intense and meaningful. They are not searching for constant attention or endless interaction. They are searching for emotional truth. They want relationships where masks can fall, where silence feels comfortable, and where vulnerability is not judged but understood. Because of this, the empath often feels disconnected from modern social culture. Many relationships today are fast, performative, and surface level. People bond over appearances, trends, gossip, or mutual benefit, but the empath instinctively looks beneath all of that. They want to know what a person fears, what secretly hurts them, what shaped their personality, and what emotional battles they hide from the world. Depth is not entertainment for the empath. It is the only type of connection that feels real. This creates a major problem in their social life. While others may enjoy dozens of casual friendships, the empath becomes emotionally exhausted by relationships that lack authenticity. They cannot easily pretend interest in conversations that feel emotionally empty. They struggle to maintain connections built only on convenience because their mind constantly searches for emotional sincerity. As a result, they naturally begin distancing themselves from relationships that do not nourish them psychologically. Many empaths have also learned through painful experience that large social circles often come with superficial loyalty. They discover that many people disappear during difficult times, misunderstand emotional vulnerability, or only maintain friendships when it benefits them. After enough disappointments, the empath becomes extremely selective. They would rather have one emotionally genuine connection than 10 shallow ones. To outsiders, this selectiveness can appear lonely or unusual. People may assume the empath lacks social skills or simply isolates themselves too much. But in reality, the empath is protecting their emotional world from relationships that feel draining rather than meaningful. They understand something many people avoid confronting: not all connection is healthy connection. And because empaths experience relationships so deeply, every emotional bond leaves a lasting imprint on them. They cannot easily detach from toxic dynamics or fake intimacy. So, instead of constantly surrounding themselves with people who only partially understand them, they often choose solitude until they find someone capable of meeting them at the depth where their soul naturally exists. Many empaths with few or no friends have experienced betrayal, manipulation, or emotional draining so many times that solitude eventually becomes a form of self-protection. What makes this especially painful is that empaths are usually the people who give the most. They listen when others are falling apart. They forgive when others would walk away. They try to understand people instead of immediately judging them. But because of this deep emotional openness, they often attract individuals who take far more than they give. The empath naturally sees potential in people. They notice hidden pain beneath toxic behavior, insecurity beneath arrogance, and loneliness beneath anger. Because of this, they frequently stay in unhealthy relationships longer than they should. They convince themselves that if they love harder, understand deeper, or remain patient enough, the other person will eventually change. But many emotionally manipulative people unconsciously recognize the empath's tolerance and begin exploiting it. Over time, the empath becomes emotionally exhausted from constantly carrying the emotional weight of others. They become the unpaid therapist, the emotional rescuer, the safe place everyone runs to during crisis. Yet, when the empath finally needs support, they often discover something heartbreaking. Very few people truly know how to hold space for them in return. This repeated imbalance creates deep emotional wounds. Betrayal affects empaths differently because they invest themselves completely into relationships. They do not connect halfway. They trust deeply, love deeply, and emotionally attach to the inner world of another person. So when deception, abandonment, or manipulation occurs, the empath does not simply lose a relationship, they lose emotional safety. After enough painful experiences, a psychological shift begins. The empath becomes cautious. They stop revealing everything about themselves. They become highly observant before trusting someone new. Some even isolate completely because their nervous system associates closeness with emotional danger. To outsiders, this may look cold, distant, or antisocial. But internally, the empath is trying to prevent further emotional damage. Many empaths also carry invisible emotional scars from relationships where they were constantly misunderstood. They may have been told they were too sensitive, too emotional, or too intense, simply because they felt things deeply. Over time, this creates emotional loneliness even in the presence of others. Eventually, the empath realizes that not everyone deserves unlimited access to their energy, kindness, or emotional depth. And once this realization becomes strong enough, they stop prioritizing being accepted by everyone. They begin prioritizing emotional peace instead. Their solitude is usually protection, not arrogance or social failure. This is one of the most misunderstood truths about empaths who have few or no friends. People often assume that someone who spends a great deal of time alone must be bitter, antisocial, emotionally weak, or unable to connect with others. But for the empath, solitude is rarely about superiority or rejection of humanity. It is about survival. It is about preserving emotional stability in a world that constantly overwhelms their inner system. Empaths experience human interaction differently from most people. Every conversation, emotional atmosphere, conflict, and hidden tension affects them deeply. They absorb emotional energy almost unconsciously. Around negativity, they feel mentally heavy. Around emotionally dishonest people, they feel unsettled even if nothing openly wrong is said. Around manipulative personalities, they often experience exhaustion without immediately understanding why. After years of these experiences, solitude becomes less of a choice and more of a necessary boundary. Many empaths were once extremely open people. They trusted easily, gave freely, and tried to emotionally support everyone around them. But repeated disappointment slowly taught them that kindness without boundaries attracts emotional exploitation. They learned that some people only approach them for comfort, validation, advice, or healing, while offering very little in return. Over time, the empath begins associating social interaction with emotional depletion instead of connection. This is when isolation begins to feel safe. In solitude, there are no hidden motives to analyze, no emotional performances to endure, and no pressure to emotionally carry other people's problems. Silence becomes calming because it allows the empath's nervous system to recover from constant overstimulation. What others interpret as loneliness may actually feel peaceful to the empath because, for the first time, their emotional energy belongs entirely to them. Another reason empaths withdraw is because they become highly selective after emotional pain. They no longer feel comfortable giving unlimited access to people who have not earned trust. This selectiveness can appear distant from the outside, but internally, it is wisdom born from experience. The empath understands that not every relationship is healthy simply because it exists. There is also a deep psychological transformation happening beneath their solitude. The empath slowly realizes that constantly seeking acceptance often leads to self-betrayal. They begin valuing emotional authenticity more than social approval. Instead of forcing themselves into environments where they feel misunderstood, they choose isolation over pretending to fit in. And eventually the empath understands something powerful. Protecting your peace is not weakness. Sometimes walking away from emotional chaos is the first real act of self-respect. They absorb emotional atmospheres intensely, which is why crowded environments, conflict-filled spaces, and emotionally chaotic people can mentally exhaust them far more than others realize. Most people walk into a room and simply notice what is happening on the surface: conversations, behavior, noise, or appearance. But the empath experiences something much deeper. They unconsciously detect emotional tension, suppressed anger, insecurity, sadness, anxiety, and emotional imbalance, even when nobody openly expresses it. Their nervous system constantly scans the emotional environment around them. This heightened sensitivity often begins long before they fully understand themselves. As children, many empaths were unusually aware of emotional shifts inside their home or social surroundings. They could sense when someone was upset before words were spoken. They noticed hidden tension between family members. They felt emotionally responsible for keeping peace even at a young age. Over time, this emotional hyper-awareness becomes deeply wired into their personality. As adults, this sensitivity becomes both a gift and a burden. The empath can deeply understand people, offer comfort, and recognize emotional truth quickly. But the cost is constant overstimulation. Loud environments, aggressive personalities, fake social behavior, and emotionally unstable individuals create psychological fatigue because the empath absorbs the emotional atmosphere instead of simply observing it. This is why many empaths become drained after spending time in crowds or around emotionally demanding people. Even when they appear calm externally, internally they may be processing layers of emotional energy that do not even belong to them. After social events, they often need isolation to emotionally reset. Without time alone, they begin feeling mentally heavy, emotionally irritated, anxious, or disconnected from themselves. One of the most difficult parts of this experience is that empaths frequently struggle to separate their own emotions from the emotions they absorb from others. They may suddenly feel sadness, stress, anger, or exhaustion without understanding where it came from. In reality, they are unconsciously carrying emotional energy from their environment. This creates confusion because the empath starts believing something is wrong within them when often they are reacting to emotional atmospheres around them. Because of this, many empaths slowly avoid environments that feel emotionally overwhelming. They prefer quiet spaces, meaningful one-on-one conversations, and emotionally safe people. Too much stimulation makes them feel psychologically crowded. It is not that they dislike human connection. They simply experience it too intensely. Eventually, the empath learns that protecting their emotional environment is necessary for mental peace. They begin understanding that constant exposure to negativity, emotional chaos, and superficial energy slowly damages their inner balance. And once they realize how deeply environments affect them, they stop feeling guilty for needing distance, silence, and emotional recovery. Empaths often feel misunderstood because they sense things others ignore, and this creates a deep psychological separation between them and the people around them. From a very early age, many empaths notice emotional details that others overlook completely. They can sense hidden discomfort behind someone's smile, tension behind polite words, jealousy beneath support, or sadness hidden under confidence. While most people focus only on actions and conversations, the empath instinctively reads emotional energy, body language, silence, tone shifts, and unspoken emotional contradictions. The problem is that most people do not experience reality this way. So when the empath reacts to something invisible to everyone else, they are often dismissed as too sensitive, dramatic, negative, or overthinking. This becomes emotionally painful because the empath is not imagining these things. They are detecting emotional truths that have not yet surfaced openly. Many times the empath notices manipulation, dishonesty, or emotional instability long before others do. But because they cannot always logically explain what they feel, people doubt their perception. Over time, this repeated invalidation creates emotional loneliness. The empath begins feeling disconnected from the world around them because their inner experience is rarely understood. They may stay quiet about what they sense because speaking honestly often leads to judgment or misunderstanding. Eventually, they start feeling like outsiders in ordinary social environments. This misunderstanding becomes even stronger in relationships. Empaths naturally seek emotional depth, honesty, and authenticity, but many people communicate on a much more surface level. When the empath notices emotional inconsistency or hidden tension, they instinctively want to address it. But others may avoid uncomfortable conversations, deny their emotions, or become defensive. This leaves the empath frustrated because they can feel problems emotionally long before they become visible externally. Another painful aspect is that empaths often understand other people deeply while receiving very little understanding in return. They become the listener, the observer, the emotional support system for others. People feel emotionally safe around them because the empath notices pain others ignore. Yet very few people ask what the empath is carrying internally. Very few recognize how exhausting it is to constantly absorb emotional complexity without feeling emotionally seen themselves. As a result, many empaths begin withdrawing into solitude. Not because they hate people, but because isolation feels less painful than constantly feeling misunderstood. In solitude, they no longer need to explain their sensitivity or suppress their intuition to make others comfortable. Eventually, the empath realizes something important. Being misunderstood does not mean they are wrong. Sometimes it simply means they perceive emotional realities that others are not yet conscious enough to recognize. Empaths unconsciously become emotional healers for broken people, and this is one of the main reasons they often end up emotionally exhausted, isolated, and misunderstood. There is something naturally comforting about an empath's presence. People feel safe around them without fully understanding why. Strangers open up to them quickly. Emotionally wounded individuals are drawn toward them. Those carrying trauma, loneliness, insecurity, or emotional confusion instinctively sense that the empath will listen without immediate judgment. And the empath usually does. This happens because empaths possess an unusual ability to emotionally understand others. They do not just hear pain, they feel it. When someone suffers, the empath instinctively wants to reduce that suffering. They become patient with damaged people, compassionate toward emotionally unstable behavior, and understanding of wounds others would reject. They often believe that enough love, support, or emotional presence can help another person heal. But this creates a dangerous pattern. The empath slowly becomes a refuge for emotionally broken individuals while neglecting their own emotional well-being. They constantly give advice, reassurance, comfort, forgiveness, and emotional energy to others. They become the late-night listener, the emotional caretaker, the person everyone calls during crisis. Yet few people stop to ask who heals the empath. Over time, this imbalance becomes psychologically destructive. The empath starts absorbing the emotional pain of the people they try to save. They carry other people's sadness into their own mind. They overthink conversations, worry about everyone's emotional state, and feel responsible for fixing problems that were never theirs to carry. Because they naturally understand pain, they often tolerate unhealthy behavior longer than they should. They excuse manipulation, emotional inconsistency, and even disrespect because they focus more on the wounded side of a person than on the damage that person is causing. Many empaths also become trapped in one-sided relationships where they are valued more for what they provide emotionally than for who they truly are. People seek them during emotional breakdowns but disappear once they feel better. Others become dependent on the empath's emotional support while giving little back in return. Eventually, the empath realizes they are surrounded by people who consume their energy without truly seeing them. This repeated emotional draining creates deep exhaustion. The empath begins feeling emotionally empty because they have spent years pouring themselves into others without restoration. And after enough disappointment, they slowly withdraw from people altogether. Eventually, the empath learns one of the hardest lessons of all: compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. And the moment they stop trying to heal everyone, they finally begin healing themselves. Their loneliness is frequently connected to a deeper psychological awakening and self-preservation. What appears to the outside world as isolation is often the result of an inner transformation taking place quietly beneath the surface. Many empaths do not suddenly become distant overnight. Their withdrawal usually happens slowly, after years of emotional overload, disappointment, betrayal, and deep observation of human behavior. At some point, the empath begins to see the world differently, and once this shift happens, they can no longer participate in relationships the same way they once did. This awakening often begins with emotional exhaustion. The empath realizes they have spent most of their life giving energy away, trying to understand others, save others, comfort others, and maintain emotional harmony even at the expense of themselves. They notice that many relationships were built around what they could provide emotionally rather than genuine mutual connection. This realization becomes painful because the empath finally understands how often they abandon their own needs to keep others comfortable. As awareness grows, the empath starts questioning everything around them. They begin noticing social masks, emotional manipulation, shallow validation, performative friendships, and relationships based on convenience instead of truth. Conversations that once seemed normal now feel emotionally empty. Certain people begin to feel energetically heavy. The empath becomes increasingly sensitive to dishonesty, hidden motives, and emotional inconsistency. And because of this heightened awareness, they slowly lose interest in superficial social interaction. This is where loneliness enters their life, not as punishment, but as a transitional space between who they were and who they are becoming. The empath starts separating from environments and people that drain their spirit. They stop forcing themselves to fit into groups where they feel emotionally disconnected. They begin protecting their peace instead of constantly sacrificing it for acceptance. To outsiders, this may look like withdrawal, but internally, the empath is rebuilding their emotional identity. During this stage, solitude becomes deeply transformative. Alone, the empath begins reconnecting with their own thoughts, emotions, intuition, and personal truth. They start understanding that being constantly available to everyone was never the same as being genuinely loved. They realize that emotional peace is more valuable than social approval. This awakening also strengthens self-preservation. The empath learns to create boundaries, trust their intuition, and stop giving unlimited access to people who disrespect their energy. They no longer feel obligated to emotionally rescue everyone they meet. And eventually, the loneliness that once felt painful begins to feel meaningful. Because the empath understands something profound, sometimes losing connection with the world is necessary in order to reconnect with yourself.